Flatwound strings or roundwound strings, which ones are best for you? And like your choice of bass or amp, the type of strings you play will have a big effect on your overall sound. Today I've set up the same bass with both flatwound and roundwound strings so you can hear the two types of strings battle it out. Now the choice of strings you want mostly comes down to what style of music you want to play, so it's useful to have a quick history of the two types of strings, and let me know in the comments if you prefer flatwound or roundwound strings, and please give the video a like if you find it helpful. Flatwound strings, or flats, have a smooth finish. You can see that here. In the early days of electric bass, they were the most popular type of strings. They're pretty much the only type of strings, and were used in so many classic 1960s recordings. James Jamison on the Motown albums, Paul McCartney on the Beatles albums, Carol Kaye on so much stuff including the Beach Boys, and Bernard Edwards on the Chic disco albums. Flatwound strings' smooth bottom end and lower treble were not just used in 1960s and 1970s stuff either. D'Angelo's highly influential album Voodoo, which came out in the year 2000, has one of the smoothest bass tones, courtesy of Pino Palladino's precision bass and flatwound strings. Even the samples which were used on Don't Start Now bass line by Dua Lipa were based on flatwound strings, although you'd think they'd be able to afford a real bassist. Come on guys. You could say that the classic flatwound sound is a combination of the strings as well as the string dampener. By placing a sponge under the strings, you hear the meatier part of the bass note more clearly as the harmonic overtones of the note are reduced. On the Motown records, James Jamison would keep a sponge under the silver plate. Carol Kaye also used a sponge to dampen her strings, and you can see this here. You can hear this muted sound on this classic bass line, Ain't No Mountain High Enough. Roundwound strings. Roundwound strings have tiny ridges on them because of how they're manufactured, and they are now the most frequently used bass strings on the market. They were invented in the 1960s by a British company, Rotosound, and the brighter sounding strings were made famous by The Who's John Entwistle, whose bass solo on My Generation was revolutionary at the time for its bright sound. They have a more noticeable top end, so are pretty much necessary for slap like Marcus Miller's work and other styles where bass is required to be more noticeable in the mix, so a lot of rock. But what are the selling points of each type of string? If you want a brighter sound, especially for slap and rock, you'll need roundwounds, whilst if you want a boomier, smoother low end, so reggae, funk, classic soul and blues, flatwound strings might be a better bet. Flatwound strings have less sustain, and it's important to point out that this is not a negative. In many styles, the lack of sustain on a bass note is actually desirable, like I mentioned before with Carol Kaye putting a sponge on the strings to further reduce the sustain. Flatwounds can also last longer. James Jamison famously said that the gunk keeps the funk. Roundwound strings, because of the ridges in the strings, hold on to dirt and grease which wears them out quickly. On the plus side, roundwound strings are cheaper. On another point, which is kind of neither a strong positive or negative, the grooves in the roundwound strings mean that you can zip across the strings a bit more easily, but those grooves make them a bit harsher on the fingers. So all in all, if you want brighter strings for rock or slap, try roundwounds, but for a more fuller low end, try flatwounds, especially if you've never tried them before, because they are really fun to play and they're quite different. Alright, as I've mentioned, I've set up this bass with both flatwounds and roundwounds so you can hear the difference between the two types of strings. And once again, let me know if you prefer of the sound of one over the other. Alright, that was my comparison. A big thanks to all my Patreons for helping make today's video possible, especially my VIP patron. And here are some more videos that you might enjoy.